struggled with today's sermon a bit more than I normally do when it's time to write. I find myself going down the path that is familiar to many pastors, the path of the prophet Isaiah, who finger points and attributes blame. I may still do that. You might still get the prophet in me. But today I think I want to deliver words of hope. Today I want to go ahead and focus more on something that we could move towards. And it's difficult. It's difficult in today's world with so much happening around us that is crazy. I want to let you know that this Celtic series was put together back in May. As we gathered as a staff under the guidance of our senior pastor, we started to plan out the year, and we came up with a Celtic series, and we divided it up into different Sundays. And this Sunday is supposed to be one with an environmental message and attributed to me. And little did I know back in May that there would be 3 major hurricanes that afflict us. Two of them that would hit my family and friends directly. Little did we know that there would be fires raging throughout California, and that even one of our beloved church members came back from his home in California shaken by all the destruction that he saw. So it is with all that in mind that I ask you to please pray with me. May the words from my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Grace and peace be with you on this day. So, Puerto Rico has been visited by FEMA. Puerto Rico has been visited by so many different agencies seeking to take relief. For those of you who don't know me, I lived in Puerto Rico for quite some time, and my formative years were there. And I want you to know that, because it didn't really hit the newsreels, that Superman went to Puerto Rico. Superman went to Puerto Rico and decided to take a tour, and was walking around with his big red cape, going from community to community, city to city. And then he decided, he had seen enough, and he was going to fly away. And so when he took off to take that leap, he couldn't go. And then he tried one second time, and he this time put his arms forward, and he couldn't go. He couldn't move. And he goes, "What is happening to me? Is there some kryptonite around here?" And he tried a third time, but he couldn't move. And then all of a sudden he looks back, and there, holding on to his cape, are 100,000 Puerto Ricans saying, "Come on, you can do it! You can do it!" That's one of the jokes that's been going around, because as you all know, the island of Puerto Rico is about to experience a huge drain of its people as they all move out of that island and into the state of Florida and New York and New Jersey and other places. One of our main concerns is that it will cause a brain drain. And a brain drain is when the people who are able to make intelligent decisions are no longer there. And so when the island is going to recover, it may suffer again from bad decisions. Bad decisions is something that we are all aware of. It happens in every country. It happens in every state. It happens with every government. It is part of human nature. I was listening to a program on National Public Radio called Florida Matters. Early this morning, they were interviewing Congressman David Jolly and Congressman Patrick Murphy. One is Republican, the other one is a Democrat. And they're going on a tour throughout the state, speaking at the different universities and speaking to different groups about the important it is in our present day and age for there to be a bipartisan spirit, that the spirit that has divided us as a nation should end. to that theologian right here over this sanctuary, there is a Christosphere. And that the goal of Christianity is to expand it until one day we may all know how it is that Christ commands us to love our neighbor. According to Celtic Christianity, there is no need for the Christosphere because we already are connected. We already are interwoven. That everything, in one form or another, is dependent on the other. That the words I speak today have an influence on tomorrow's thoughts. That the acts of kindness I make today have an impact on someone who may live near or far from me. According to Celtic Christianity, no one person is an island, and every decision has ripple effects, near and far, intended and unintended. And wise is the person who is aware of how far his words are carried and how far the decisions have an impact. For us to think that the shooter in Las Vegas is an isolated event, according to Celtic Christianity, is foolish. That shooter in Las Vegas is a symptom of a larger problem. For us to think that fires in California are not part of a larger ecological problem is mistaken. Celtic Christianity helps us to step back and see the bigger picture and to see how our dependence on fossil fuels just might be having an effect on the environment. Now, I know that this starts to dip into all sorts of conversations that many people would classify as political. Do we or do we not acknowledge climate change? Do we or do we not acknowledge the Paris Agreement? Do we or do we not go ahead and regulate industries for the sake of our planet? And now I don't want to go there, although I already did. And there's a certain path that I had to fight against, the path of finger pointing. Finger pointing and finding blame with our wrongs. That the wrongs in our society, the wrongs in government have led to such disasters. Don't want to go down that path because it's not helpful. It only gets people defensive. The real question for us as a church and for us as a community is to realize this is where we are. Can we do anything to stop this from happening again? Can we do anything to reverse the damage? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes, we can. And I know this because I know the past. I know history. We did this not too long ago. We went ahead and stood together as a community, and we joined our voices. We joined voices from the Republican field and the Democratic field. We joined voices with the young and the old. We joined voices and actions with people from all walks of life, from those who believe in a faith community and those who don't. And when was that? It was in the 1970s. Do you remember what you were doing in the 1970s? Maybe not. It all depends what you were doing in the 1970s. But it turns out that in the late 1960s, the cities in the United States were full of smog. People were getting sick at alarming rates. Our drinking water, our breathable air, and the soil we planted crops on were being poisoned by chemicals created by our industries. Animals were going extinct, and it sure seemed like somebody needed to do something. It was a time of crisis. So both branches of government and all aspects of our society passed legislation in a spirit of cooperation to help heal our nation. The first 6 years of the 1970s, there was a flurry of legislative acts, all to help our environment. You'll remember that the first 4 years of the 1970s were under a Republican administration. 1970, we passed the National Environmental Policy Act, requiring every major decision of the federal government to be evaluated for its impact on the environment. In 1972, there was 4 legislative accomplishments. We passed the Federal Environment Pesticide Control Act to ban the use of DDT. We passed the Clean Water Act, the Marine Protection, Research, and Sanctuaries Act, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which protects whales and dolphins, seals and manatees, animals whom we here in Florida love and love dearly. In 1973, we passed the Endangered Species Act. In 1975, we went global and passed the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Countries that signed on agreed to restrict trade of endangered species and their body parts. In 1976, the Toxic Substances Control Act. And then we took a break for the rest of the 70s. But these legislative acts and many others that followed in the decades that came created a safer and cleaner world for us and for our children. Friends, there is no doubt that our lifestyle, our needs to be comfortable, have disrupted the pace of nature. I am fully aware that we will continue to insist on those comforts to be provided and that we will not live without them. But yet, we don't need to abandon that lifestyle in order to follow an environmental path. A balance could be found. Our Christian faith could lead us to find that balance. We could, as a church, help our elected officials, local, state, and federal. Take a look at our infrastructures. Take a look at how our sewage systems could overflow or not. Take a look at how we use all sorts of chemicals in order to keep our communities safe. The question that too many of us have asked is how many more fires need to burn? How many more communities that are built in floodplains like Bonita Springs need to be demolished after a flood before we decide to speak as a community of faith and demand a balance in our zoning, a balance in our engineering, a balance that will help people of fewer resources live with dignity when a crisis hits them. I'm reminded that it's not just government, that it is also the citizenry. After all, we get the government that we vote for. And too many of us have what I call Superman theology. Superman theology is that we shrug our shoulders, we just lift up our hands up and we say, well, somehow or another we will be saved from this. People who have Superman theology believe that God will have God's hand crash through the clouds and pull us out of our misery so that we can then stand in better ground. And that, I don't think, is how God works. God, according to my theology, requires us to be in partnership, for us to work together, for us to listen to what God is calling us to do and then act. That it is through our voices that God's words could be heard. That it is through our hands that God's kindness can be shared. That it is through our very lives that God's work can be done. And so consequently, these are not the days for the soft-hearted. These are not the days for people to be passive. These are days that require strength. Let us as a church be strong and help our elected leaders make decisions that will help our environment, that will guide our communities into bold action, that will then allow for our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren to enjoy all the beauty of God's creation, a creation that was set aside, and from the very beginning, God knew that it was good. Amen.